welcome to Lislab. Deep in the Ural Mountains, a wooden statue pulled from a peat bog has been dated to the very start of the Holocene, more than 11,000 years old. That age creates a contradiction. How can a hunter-gatherer world with no writing leave behind a towering sculpture packed with symbols and faces? Subscribe and share your theory in the comments, because in this documentary we are asking one central question. What does the Shigir Idol really tell us about the minds and lives of the people who carved it? The Shigir Idol feels like something time should have erased. Wood normally rots, but peat bogs can preserve it when oxygen is cut off and decay slows to a crawl. When the broken pieces were reassembled, they formed an anthropomorphic figure with a carved head and a long plank-like body beneath, covered in sharp geometric lines. An early reconstruction in the 1890s stood about 2.8 meters tall, but a broader reconstruction in the year 1914 suggested the original monument was about 5.3 meters. Later losses mean the surviving display is about 3.4 meters tall, and some missing sections are known only from early drawings. Today, the idol is kept in Yekaterinburg at the Sverdlovsk Regional Museum of Local Law, a surviving piece of perishable Mesolithic art that almost should not exist. The story begins in gold mining, not archaeology. In the late 19th century, miners cutting into the Shigir peat bog uncovered organic artifacts sealed in wet layers, and one find stood out. It was a broken wooden figure recovered on the 24th of January 1890 at the Second Kuriensky mine, several meters below the surface. Records describe the idol appearing near wooden objects such as spoons and a paddle or oar, suggesting the bog held everyday tools as well as ritual objects. The mining owner, Count Alexei Stembok-Fermor, allowed the collection to be transferred to a local museum, where specialists began reconstructing the pieces and describing the carvings. But early publications introduced small errors about the find, year and depth, and those mistakes were repeated for decades, muddying even the basic timeline. The mining area itself has been heavily altered, and parts are no longer accessible, which means the idol context must be rebuilt from archives and scientific analysis, rather than from a keen modern excavation. When you look closely, the idol is unsettling in a quiet way. At the top is a face with eyes, a nose, and a mouth, but it is only the first. Along the body are additional faces carved into flat surfaces, stacked vertically, and careful examination in the modern era has added faces that early observers missed. When the lost fragments recorded in drawings are counted as well, researchers describe 8 faces in total, arranged like a vertical sequence. Between them, the surface is packed with zigzags, chevrons, and straight lines, dense geometry that looks less like decoration and more like deliberate communication. Then came the dates. Conventional radiocarbon tests placed the idol deep in the Mesolithic, and accelerator mass spectrometry later pushed some estimates back toward around 9,600 BC, near the start of the Holocene. Either way, it appears older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids by many millennia, and the question becomes not just what it meant, but how early hunter-gatherers could plan and carve a monument like this. Because the Shigir Idol looks purposeful, it has become a magnet for hidden history narratives. In many popular retellings, the geometric carving is treated as a true code, like a prehistoric text cut into wood. Some claim the zigzags and chevrons are proto-writing that proves literacy existed long before the first recognized scripts in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Others reinterpret the patterning as an astronomical record, arguing that the faces mark constellations, seasons, or cosmic cycles. The most dramatic version proposes that the idol is a surviving artifact of a lost civilization at the end of the last ice age, a culture advanced enough to build monuments and preserve knowledge in symbolic form. These interpretations spread because they offer a simple solution to complexity. If the object looks sophisticated, then its creators must belong to a forgotten civilization. A quieter alternative claim focuses less on lost civilizations and more on suppression. It points out that when early radiocarbon dates first suggested exceptional age, some experts doubted them, arguing that such a large symbolic sculpture did not fit their model of Mesolithic life. From this perspective, the resistance reflected older assumptions that farming societies were inherently more advanced than hunter-gatherers, and that major ritual art should appear only after permanent villages. Supporters also note that the Urals and Siberia have often been treated as peripheral in sweeping histories, making it easier to dismiss evidence that complicates a westward story of cultural progress. In its strongest form, this argument says the real mystery is not the idol, but the history of interpretation. Who gets to define what complexity looks like and where it is allowed to appear? But skepticism does not automatically imply a cover-up, because dating wood is genuinely hard, and the idol find spot was disturbed by mining long before modern excavation standards. The mainstream investigation starts with what can be inspected directly. Detailed analysis shows the idol was carved from larch, and growth rings indicate the tree lived for roughly a century and a half before it was cut down. The trunk was split and shaped into a long plank, then carved while the wood was still fresh, suggested by the crispness of the cuts and the lack of crushed fibers typical of working dry wood. The body is covered in deep geometric engraving dominated by zigzags, and the faces are arranged as distinct images rather than a single repeated mask. Damage and compression at the base suggest the sculpture once stood upright, pressing its weight onto a hard surface before it fell and entered water. One published report has suggested that some concave details, especially facial elements, may have been carved using beaver-jaw teeth as a tool, but this remains a specific hypothesis within a broader picture of skilled Stone Age woodworking. Crucially, the idol does not stand alone in the peat. The Shigir bog has yielded thousands of waterlogged artifacts, including wooden implements and carvings, showing that woodworking and symbolic craft existed in this region, even if only rarely preserved. Dating is where the Shigir Idol becomes a case study in how archaeological science evolves. Conventional radiocarbon dating in the 1990s placed the sculpture in the Mesolithic, roughly around 7,800 BC, and multiple measurements agreed closely enough to strengthen confidence in that general period. In the year 2014, a new research program documented the carvings in greater detail and designed an accelerator mass spectrometry strategy linked to the tree rings, sampling from different growth horizons rather than taking one large chunk. When those AMS results were published in the year 2018, they suggested a much earlier age near the start of the Holocene, around 9,600 BC. The researchers also noted that this period is notoriously difficult to pin down precisely because radiocarbon calibration curves flatten and shift around the transition into the Holocene. Later discussion raised practical issues as well, such as whether conservation materials applied in the museum could affect some samples, and that is one reason some teams prioritize dates from the innermost wood. Supporting context comes from the wider Shigir collection, where independently dated bone, antler, and wooden artifacts show repeated human use of these wetlands over long spans of time. Even within professional archaeology, the earliest proposed date is not accepted by everyone in exactly the same way. Some specialists point out that the wider set of AMS dates reported from different samples spans a broad range, and they argue that local paleogeography and peat formation processes in the Trans-Urals may fit better with a later Mesolithic horizon than with the very earliest Holocene estimates. Another caution raised in scholarly debate is the old wood problem. This is the possibility that a sculpture can be carved from a trunk that was already ancient when it was worked, which would make the wood older than the carving. Researchers who favor an early date respond that the cutting traces and dendrotechnical observations indicate the idol was carved from freshly felled larch rather than from a fossilized log pulled from the bog. What stands out is that this debate is about timing at the scale of millennia, not about whether the idol is genuinely prehistoric, because every serious line of evidence still places it deep in the Mesolithic. And then there is meaning, which science can approach but not solve, because zigzags and faces do not come with a key. The most careful conclusion is that the Shigir Idol documents a complex symbolic world among early Holocene hunter-gatherers in the Urals, whether it embodied a myth, marked a sacred shoreline, or signaled a boundary in a landscape that mattered. So how could people so early carve such detailed symbolic art? The first answer is that our timelines are shaped by survival rather than by reality. Stone and bone dominate museums because they endure, while wood almost always disappears. The Shigir Idol is rare because a peat bog sealed it in a low-oxygen environment, preserving a monument that might otherwise have vanished without leaving a trace. The second answer is that complex culture is not a product of farming alone. Complex ideas, rituals, and aesthetic conventions can thrive in mobile societies, especially where people return to meaningful places over generations. The idol does not require cities to exist, and it does not require writing to be symbolic. It requires skill, time, and a reason to communicate beyond the everyday. What it truly challenges is not the capacity of Mesolithic people, but modern expectations about what early societies should look like. What remains unresolved is the hardest part to recover from any deep past. Meaning is the missing piece. The stacked faces might represent spirits, ancestors, or a sequence in a story, and the zigzags might refer to water, boundaries, danger, or something abstract we can no longer decode. The debate over the exact date remains a live example of scientific caution, because early Holocene chronology is difficult, and different lines of evidence do not always align perfectly. Yet even with uncertainty, the Shigir Idol forces a clearer vision of perspective. Monumental symbolic expression did not begin with the first farmers, and the forest-sown Ural world was not an empty margin of history. It was a place where people imagined, remembered, and carved those thoughts into wood. The Shigir Idol survived because a bog hid it, but its message survived only in fragments. What do you think the faces and zigzag patterns were trying to communicate, if they were meant to be read at all? If you found this investigation valuable, like the video, subscribe to ListLab, and leave your interpretation in the comments.